Good afternoon. My name is Elena Perez. I'm the Assistant Secretary General of the Latin American and Caribbean Federation of Domestic Workers. And together, my colleague Evelyn Rosales and I, she is also a member of it, we are going to cover the topic of human rights violations during the pandemic and its consequences. Historically, crises produce instability in Latin America and the Caribbean, imposing, among other things, migration, social inequality, employment in degrading conditions. The legacies of colonization contribute to a system of hierarchy and discrimination based on race, immigration status, and color. And this has already been recognized by this commission in the Special Rapporteurship on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights of Afro-Descendant Persons, a report that was published in 2021. Our organization, CONLACTRAHO, noted that poverty is closely related to the lack of access to social security systems and employment protection systems. It contributes to growing migration both within countries and beyond borders to obtain a salary. It hinders access to education, healthcare, food, and it increases child labor at early ages. Domestic workers are one of the sectors in the labor force hardest hit by everything that has worsened, that became more acute or worse during the COVID-19 pandemic. It represented an increase in gender violence with a loss of employment and greater informality in terms of work opportunities. This Inter-American Commission has already noted the impact of the health emergency in the region in its Resolution 1 of 2020, and in 2021, the ILO identified in its study on 10 years since the adoption of Convention 189 the loss of employment in the domestic work sector with a decline of 50%, the harshest impact among all employed persons. The Economic Commission for Latin America and UN Women identified in 2020 that the COVID-19 crisis has revealed the fragile nature of social protection systems with a particularly negative impact on domestic workers. Now I give the floor to my colleague, Evelyn Rosales. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Evelyn Rosales. I'm Salvadoran. I have been a domestic worker for 30 years, and I'm also part of the organization CONLACTRAHO. During the pandemic, according to ILO estimates, 70% of domestic workers suffered loss of employment, drastic reductions to their earnings, backsliding in terms of guarantees of rights, precarious working conditions, and also precarious income. This condition tends to undercut the commitments of the states to progressive development of the rights and the principle on a prohibition on going backwards in terms of social rights. The case of Honduras shows what happened in the context of the pandemic. The lack of social protection, access to Social Security became more difficult for domestic workers, and this led to illness and death. The results identified by the ILO in 2021 show that among ourselves, only a few were able to have access to remunerated quarantine. Most were dismissed or continued working without biosafety conditions. We played an essential role in caring for the ill during the pandemic. Nonetheless, unlike other groups of workers, the increase in working hours was not recognized economically, nor was protection and care provided for any infection that might have been acquired in the workplace. I now give the floor to my colleague Alvaro. Good afternoon. My name is Alvaro Velarca Hernandez, and I represent the American Conference of Social Security. This is an international organization whose aim includes, among others, to contribute and cooperate with the development of Social Security in the Americas. I am going to talk about the regional issue in this regard and the relationship with the human rights of domestic workers. As the COVID pandemic was mentioned, as was mentioned, the pandemic showed once again the importance of providing Social Security to domestic workers. The main function of Social Security is to guarantee the income of working persons and their families in the face of illness, unemployment, or death, and also to guarantee access to healthcare services. Let's recall that the Protocol of San Salvador of the OAS at Articles 9 and 10 establishes the right to Social Security and health for all persons. Therefore, this Organization of American States and the International Labor Organization have signed agreements and made joint statements to promote decent work that provides access to Social Security for all working people. Since the 2001 Ottawa Declaration, the OAS has recognized the member states that adopt ILO conventions. It's relevant to note the adoption of Convention 189, which establishes the obligation of states to ensure access for domestic workers to Social Security systems. Nonetheless, in most of the country, even though most of the countries of the Americas have ratified this agreement, the affiliation of domestic workers remains at low levels practically throughout the region, according to estimates of the Inter-American Conference on Social Security in mid-2022. To cite just some examples of the countries with the highest levels of affiliation, I could mention Uruguay with 70%, Chile 47.6%, Costa Rica 36.2%, Argentina 24.1%, or 23%, and Colombia just 18.6% of domestic workers are affiliated to or with Social Security. For this reason, it's important that the states establish mechanisms to facilitate affiliation and the maintaining of quota payments to Social Security over time. This includes adapting and making more flexible IT systems and Social Security systems so as to be able to adapt to the reality of other forms of work that are not traditional ones. This to guarantee the inclusion of groups that find themselves in vulnerable situations, including domestic workers, agricultural workers, persons who work on platforms, among others. If these mechanisms had existed, it could have changed the reality of Jamie Casco and all the victims whose testimony we just heard in Mexico. The Mexican Social Security Institute has set as a precedent a good practice in adapting the Social Security system and improving its processes or procedures so as to allow easier and more immediate affiliation of domestic workers with all of the particularities. There are also strategies underway in relation to Social Security, such as in the case of Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile, that have been observed by the International Federation of Domestic Work. In Argentina, for example, the public policy Registrados Registered Women for 2021 grants tax benefits to employers for registering and keeping up to date and documenting so as to regulate domestic work. The country offers a percentage of subsidy in the payment of the salaries in exchange for the employers guaranteeing payments to Social Security by the domestic workers. In view of the foregoing, we urge countries of the Americas to commit to transforming their societies through education and Social Security, the premise being that understanding and fully exercising this right is necessary in order to beat back poverty, and it's responsibility of all of society to see to it that employers carry out their obligations. I cite Uruguay once again. It educates from childhood regarding the importance of Social Security, and as we saw, it has the highest rates of formal sector employment in the hemisphere. Likewise, Dominican Republic is promoting a reform of Law 8701 so as to include in curricula education from early childhood on the importance of the right to Social Security throughout one's life. These mechanisms generally should be taken into account to guarantee the universalization of Social Security as a fundamental premise for the prosperity of our nations. Thank you very much, and I now give the floor back to June Barrett.
Thank you. Now I'm going to address the migration theme. Migration is a complex phenomenon that is driven by a variety of factors. The pursuit of better economic opportunity, violence, climate change, and natural disasters are among the most common reasons why people migrate. In this situation of migration vulnerability, women are exposed to different form of violence, example, poverty and suffering. The International Domestic Workers Federation, together with informal organizations, find that for migrant women, domestic worker is the main source of income. The percentage of domestic workers among migrant women is higher than the percentage among women in general. Our research identified that the intersection of migration and indigenous identity is a factor that increases vulnerability to severe economic and sexual violence and work in near slavery conditions. In this report on women's work, Education and Resources, published in 2011, this commission recognized that indigenous women in the region live in poverty because they face discrimination and are often excluded from social economic benefits and social protections. States in the region have denied migrant domestic workers access to protections that are otherwise granted to this workforce. The primary reason for this exclusion is that legislation makes it difficult for domestic workers to obtain work visa and access on decent employment. This phenomenon was observed in the most common migration destination in the region, such as Chile, Panama, the Dominican Republic, among others. The ILO noted in a 2016 study that achieving greater formalization of domestic work and better access to Social Security will require significant reforms in immigration policies throughout the region. Now we'll turn it over to my sister, Joanna. Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Juana Collado from Chile. I started working at age 12, and I've been working for more than 40 years. I'm a member of CONLACTRAHO. I'm going to talk about slave domestic labor, the loss of formal sector employment, the extenuating work schedules, the overburden of work, and even violations of the right to free movement have had a negative impact on domestic workers, as has been indicated by CONLACTRAHO and CLADEM in a 2022 study. While there were already degrading working conditions or jobs analogous to slavery in Latin America, situations of becoming enclosed and confined by force have been aggravated. The Brazilian unions have denounced several situations of domestic slave work, such as the case of Madalena Giordano, who was rescued in November 2020, and the case of Sonia Maria de Jesus, who was rescued from the residence of a person who works in the Brazilian judiciary, this in June of 2023. The case of Sonia Maria is known by this commission because of the OAS intervention that took place on last October 27th. The organizations are asking that she not be forced to stay where her rights are being violated, and that she be able to access an adequate protection network. Sonia is a black woman who is deaf, and until recently she didn't have any personal ID documents nor access to sign language, and she was enslaved for 40 years. This is also the case of Maria Madalena Giordano, a black woman who from the age of 8 had served as a domestic worker for a family with no remuneration for 38 years. Those women work without enjoying any right, not even the right to have their own family or to own anything. After the history or the story of Madalena Giordano became public, another 15 workers were freed in the following 6 months. The positive repercussion has moved sectors of the labor inspectors in the Brazilian state. These are operations that also rescued Sonia Maria. In addition, they've opened up another gap in the policies after the rescue and judicial guarantees. We have denounced that judicial agreements have low levels of economic reparation for the victims. This was the case of Madalena Giordano. Also, the proceedings are secret. There are difficulties when it comes to representing individual interests, and there's a lack of policies to address and support a very vulnerable population after years of slave labor. This is a life history that leaves irreversible marks. They must be given economic reparation and get attention to be able to enjoy other rights. These cases also show how the domestic justice system is challenged by racism, which is also present in the judiciary, ignoring the nature of these laws that protect life and liberty. The influence of structural and historic discrimination was recognized by the court in the case of the workers of Fazenda Brasil Verde and Brazil. In the cases of Madalena Zonia in Brazil, the state is investigating, but it's not promoting domestic justice, it is not ensuring judicial guarantees. In the region, there has systematically been a lack of labor inspection, with the justification being that the workplaces do not provide judicial guarantees and just reparation. And now I give the floor to my colleague Maite. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Maite Mateo. I am the representative of CARE for the region, and I'm going to talk about violence in the workplace. It's very important to take note of the scope of the lack of implementation of Conventions 189 and 190 of the ILO, particularly as regards labor violence in the workplace, where we can see how labor violence is combined and reinforced by gender-based violence. In the region, there has systematically been a lack of labor inspection, as was noted by our colleague, with the justification being that the workplace is a private home where there's a right to privacy, and therefore they are not going to, they're not subject to oversight or inspection, but it is precisely labor inspection that would make it possible for paid domestic workers to enjoy judicial guarantees for seeking reparation and to eradicate the violations they've suffered. It's very important for the states to promote policies to prevent gender violence in the workplace and institute public policies that prioritize investigation by the state independent of the capacity of the domestic workers to contribute to or directly stimulate or spark the investigations. As Juanita says, a domestic worker in testimony shared as part of a study carried out by CONLACTRAHO and CARE, she said, "We suffered all sort of sexual violence, but our workplace was inviolable. No one else could enter, no one could inspect or monitor us, and it was in that context that I suffered all sorts of abuse." The CONLACTRAHO has found that many workers abandon their jobs when they are victims of harassment and violence, and the younger they join the work, the greater the risks they face when it comes to sexual harassment and sexual violence. In the same study carried out in 2023 by CARE and CONLACTRAHO regarding discrimination, racism, and violence, it was verified that it was found that there was a lack of knowledge of their rights, fear of reprisals, and a fear of being re-victimized. These are the main obstacles that keep the domestic workers from denouncing the violence they suffer, and therefore their cases end up in total impunity. And now I yield to my colleague, Maria de la Luz.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to address. I'm Maria de la Luz. I'm the representative of CONLACTRAHO. I've been a domestic worker for 15 years, almost a little more than 10 years experience working, and I'm going to later let Carmen Cruz speak. It's obvious that ILO Convention 189 obligates governments to improve the working conditions of domestic workers. We believe it's not sufficient. We believe it hasn't been real or tangible, the actions that have been taken. And therefore, in 2021, the ILO ascertained that only 4 of every 10 domestic workers work between 35 and 48 weekly hours. In other words, more than 60 or less than 20. This gives rise to very little informality and very little regulation and not much recognition. Likewise, it reflects salaries that are below minimum wages in many countries. In turn, the workday there are risks and there's growing informality. These are very dire data in the region, but particularly alarming in countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, Guyana, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Paraguay, Dominican Republic, and others. The Inter-American Court has said that states have the duty to adopt the necessary measures and fulfill their obligations under the convention. Informality is an obstacle for Social Security and other labor rights, such as control of work hours and adequate pay. To combat informality, states needs to assimilate modalities of domestic work and include characteristics of eventuality and several different bosses. Working for several different people. Maria del Carmen. Good afternoon. My name is Maria del Carmen Cruz Martinez. I'm a Nicaraguan migrant in Costa Rica. I've been working for 12 years there. I am in charge of political advocacy of CONLACTRAHO, and I'm going to give the request for relief to the Commission. We request that the Inter-American Court and that the state has the duty to adopt the necessary measures. Then, and to specifically write a report on domestic work in the region and establish general principles in the Inter-American system of human rights protection. We propose the participation of the Inter-American Conference of Social Security, CISS, in this study. Observe the issue of domestic work in all its reports and make technical visits to country. Recommend to states to promote studies on domestic work with a view to promote public policies that are more attentive to our particular needs. Recommend the member states to assimilate through provisions of domestic law, modalities of domestic work by hour, day, or with several different employers, establishing mechanisms for formalization, Social Security, and minimum wages. Recommend to the states to promote membership and maintenance in the systems of Social Security and be attentive to plurality of employment. Recommend to the state to promote the review of laws with regard to migration to ensure formalization of domestic work. Recommend states standards for the prevention and attention of workplace harassment and violence. Recommend to the states to adopt measures to combat informality and recognize it as a violation of human rights with implications and consequences in work, social, economic, and cultural consequences, and for these domestic workers. Recognize as a violation of human rights provisions of domestic law of states that eliminate legal protection for domestic work outside of the limits provided under ILO Convention 189 for those states that have ratified it, and recognizes a violation of human rights the lack of adequate oversight, failure to investigate ex officio and effective mechanisms of justice. Thank you very much. We count on you for the daily exercise of our human and labor rights. Thank you.
But I trust we will get that list of recommendations where at the appropriate time. So now the Commission is going to respond to what they've heard and also maybe make have their own thoughts about the role of the Commission in advancing the rights of domestic workers. And I want to start with Julissa Mantier, who is, as I said, the rapporteur for women's rights. Please go ahead, Julissa.
Muchas gracias, señora vicepresidenta. Inicio con un saludo muy cordial y muy respetuoso y con un agradecimiento, porque los testimonios que ustedes han dado hoy, todo lo que ustedes...
Because the testimony that you just given gives a gives a green light and illuminates the Inter-American Commission. And so the Commission met with a rapporteur not long ago of the IACHR with a group of domestic workers in Honduras, where we were narrating a situation that was similar, and they were organized. First, I want to thank you and that organization that you've showed us in your testimony how well organized and how invaluable this is. Secondly, beyond the Inter-American Commission, what we think, we want to add the intersectional interplay here. They're girls, they're women, in addition to other intersectional factors. So there are a lot of girls, minors, who accompany their mothers. They end up being domestic workers as well, and they're sucked into the field. And this is a violation, too. We have to look at this, and I'm sure there'll be comments on this as well. It's very important what you're raising, the possibility to engage in a study or a specific study on this, that is. Why? Because we know, if there's anything we know, the role of care that we've been assigned since time immemorial, to be assigned to domestic work. In other words, it's always been felt that care is what our role, and that's the only job we have to perform. So that's why I want to comment that the Inter-American Court will issue an advisory opinion on the right to care, to be cared for, and to care. That care, even though it's a right, it's a duty of the state to provide it as well. So it's not an accident that this domestic work and the role of care, and it's not viewed as a job, but rather a part of your role. And there's a lot of a broad range of abuse that we see in this. It's devastating. A little girl that knocks at the door at 8 years old to ask for food from neighbors, and they appropriate, so to speak, take over the life of this child. But also something that you mentioned is, we've seen in that when she had 70 some odd or old man marries him, waits for him to die, and then the inheritance doesn't even go to the young child. And so there's a huge amount of human rights violations that take place in all this intergenerational interplay here, the inheritances with this domestic work, and something that's happened in all of our countries, the idea of godmothers, you're going to be the godmother, it's exploitation of us. The Inter-American Court has spoken about these modern forms of slave labor. And I believe that this case that you're bringing up here guides us with regard to what's actually happening on the ground. I'm very grateful for the reference to migration. Migration. Also, I remember the case of Ecuador. It's very well known. The women who are going from Ecuador to Spain to work as domestic workers and to earn money. And so there's a whole workforce, an informal workforce, and they have no rights. And if they have no rights, they have no benefits. So and they sustain society, however, with work. And so and also what you've been telling us, in addition to all the violations of the economic, social, and cultural rights, there's also a violation of Belén do Pará to prevent and to eradicate and punish and prevent violence against women. This is specific violence against women. It falls under this convention. It's not. There's no question about it, because I don't have really any other questions, but I want to express my gratitude for this difficult dimension, how hard it is, having organized and gotten things together, your act together, to be able to come here in your busy lives. And the secretary from assistant secretary, executive secretary for monetary, and the rapporteur that's here for these rights, IACHR, and And so when public policy is established, there has to be input from you. There's discrimination with regard to vacation time. Some countries give less vacation time than with other words, and then there's space in the homes that are for the domestic workers have no light, don't have accommodations, and it's horrible situations that we don't have to dig very deep to find them. I believe the Inter-American Commission, with this information you provide them, we are going to use this information to see how we can shed light on this. And I'm going to finish up with my deep gratitude for providing the information you gave us, and please provide us any more that you have. And that's it. I want to reiterate, this is once again for the 4th time, thank you for shedding light on this dimension, and it has to be taken into account by the Commission without fail.
Commissioner Mantia, and over to you, Javier.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Vice President. My greetings to Julissa Mantilla and Assistant Executive Secretary for Monitoring, Maria Claudia Pulido, and also to the organizations that have been convened and have requested, that is, this particular hearing to bring this issue on the table and put it on the agenda once again. That is the agenda of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. This issue, just as other issues that are linked to the labor world, but for different reasons and for different circumstances, and has been issue that has been excluded, the protections of rights that are domestic workers are entitled to. These protections have been excluded, these guarantees, and they are reviewed in the Special Rapporteur for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights, the REDESCA, and with regard to work that we've done already for domestic workers, paid domestic workers, on domestic and on digital platforms. We've done some workers, for example, women who are garbage collectors and who sell things on roads, public roads, for different wages. People have to live off of their work, but they're, in reality, the fact of the matter, the facts on the ground are that they don't have any protections of the basic rights to access to Social Security, because this is informal work. Any possible way of being able to transition or to deal with emergency situations that arise that have to do with health or with aging and being able to retire. So in the specific case at hand of this group that has come here in this hearing, perhaps you have the advantage that you have ILO standards that have been set in this area. But even so, these domestic workers, generally speaking, do not benefit from these rights despite these standards set by the ILO. We, as have ascertained, seen with our eyes, it's been established here at this hearing, this situation of informal work that so characterized the engagement in this work in so many countries with very few exceptions. My country is one of the countries, Uruguay, that does have one of the lowest rates of informal work. My particular country, Uruguay. In any case, most countries don't. And from this point of view, my main question I want to propose to you is related to what do you believe that, how do you believe that the Inter-American system, specifically the REDESCA, my special rapporteurship, how can we contribute to the work you're engaged in to dignify and ensure the rights of women, domestic workers who are in this specific field of work, economic activity in our countries, because we must mention it. It's a very consequential area of the labor force. it's such an important economic activity in our countries. It's widespread, used everywhere. It's not meaningless, that's for sure. It's a branch of labor activity that's of the utmost importance and widely practiced. So that's my main question. That's what it have to do. That's what it is. How do you feel that the Inter-American system, specifically the REDESCA, the Commission, are able to make a contribution to your struggle to raise the profile, to put into focus these issues that you have been enduring and bring about the changes that are necessary? Thank you.
Javier, and I turn over to you, Maria Claudia.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The first of all, I would like to express my excitement and the emotion I feel in hearing this hearing. I had the possibility to take part in 2019 in Sucre. I took part in Bolivia in that hearing, and I've seen everything that's been done since 2019 to date. But even though there's been advances, there's still quite a number of challenges. And this made me think deeply about these testimonies and all the information with regard to the differentiated impact on domestic workers. As you know, the Commission tried to be very active to take a close look at different realities. And Resolution 120 it issued to act as a guidelines for the states in dealing with a pandemic from a human rights perspective. And it authored a report on follow-up issues. But I have to tell you that this was not taken into account, what you raise here, and this is self-criticism I am engaging in here. And that's why I want to take advantage of this Inter-American space here to put at the center the issues of domestic workers. That's where it should be at the center of our efforts, and to be front and center at the top of the agenda. And I'd like to issue an appeal to apply or to attempt to promote the principles established in Convention 189 and the Belém do Pará Convention as applied to domestic workers, paid domestic workers. But it's a major challenge. And I believe it's very, very timely to conduct a study on the rights of paid and unpaid domestic workers throughout the region. This is a study that I believe that this is such a timely era to do this, because in January we're going to work on the annual operational plan, the plan of action of the Commission. Of course, we're going to work hand in hand with the REDESCA, the Special Rapporteurship on Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights. And so this poses a trial. The current rapporteur for the rights of women is that in this transition between the composition of the Commission from this year, and then we're going to have a new composition next year. So the new members of the Commission next year have to take into account this study, which it'll be their job to push forward, to spearhead. And so I would like to know, what are the components that you view that such a study should have? I'd like to ask you, what are the voices that should be heard? Whose voices should be heard from throughout the region to include right into this report? And that would be mostly everything I want to say. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Maria Claudia. And good afternoon. I want to thank everyone for your contributions and your guidance this afternoon to the Commission. And we took note of your recommendations, and I hope we can get it in written form. To say that there's no getting away from the fact that the experiences of women who do domestic work, very much connected to gender inequality first and foremost. It's not the only inequality that helps us understand the status of domestic workers or women who do domestic work, but it's really important, because in whatever endeavor we are in life, women's labors are undervalued. So you start off with that, and then you add the work that is associated with women, which is the care work, what we call the care work, whether it's in the home, taking care of the home, taking care of children, that work is undervalued and invisibilized. Though it's the most necessary of all work, it makes all of the work possible. But I suppose in the context of patriarchy, it's, the undervaluing it, the invisibilizing of it has a purpose, and it reinforces gender inequality. And of course, you add to that the income inequalities, the women and girls who are in the most vulnerable circumstances, who are in need for income. Those are the ones that are most, of course, susceptible, at risk of being exploited and harmed. And so I think we know a lot more about the situation of women who do domestic work because of organizations such as yours, who have been speaking out insistently for quite a long while now. In fact, your domestic workers are the ones behind the standards development, behind the convention, the ILO Convention 189. Without your advocacy, your research, your insistence on visibility, I don't think we would be here. And I'm coming from the Caribbean, so I'm going to take the opportunity to speak the names of our Caribbean heroines in this field. Some of you may know them: Clotilde Walcott and Ida LeBlanc and Shirley Price from Jamaica, who really have spent a lot of time saying women's work has to be valued. In some countries in the region, the Caribbean region, domestic work is not even classified as work that is recognized for labor protection. That's how far back we are in some cases. And I went to look at it when you all were talking. There are only 4 countries from the Caribbean that have ratified ILO 189, CARICOM countries. But then I went to look at Latin America, and it's only 12. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done to encourage member states to, gratify and more importantly, implement the standards contained in ILO Convention 189. Everything you've said, important to talk about. The informalization is at the really heart of the exploitation. If work is invisible and individualized, because women doing domestic work are not working collectively, it's maybe only them in the house. So it's very difficult to have that freedom of association, very difficult to collectively organize. And then the informality, which also drives, as all of you have been saying, the lack of social protection, the lack of access to social security. And that's not only for times of COVID. For example, the majority of women who were doing domestic work had no social security in the time of COVID. But it's not just COVID, it's in pension plans, completely outside of pension plans, because there's no mandatory, many countries there's no mandatory requirement for employers to pay social security. And even if there is that requirement, someone talked about labor inspectorate, there's no one actually doing that oversight of what's happening in homes. So there are many facets here that have to be paid attention to. And I think, collectivizing in any way that we can is critical. Having a collective voice is critical to addressing this issue. So I'm like Julissa, I don't have any real questions. I just have endorsements. Every recommendation you make, I agree with. And I think that certainly, I'm happy that Maria Claudia said that the study is something that we should do. And it should, we have a 5-year strategic plan. And so I think we can commit Maria Claudia to doing it in the context of our 5-year strategic plan, and also in ensuring that you are all involved in shaping the content of that report. So I just want to thank you for all your guidance, but I think there have been some questions, and you may also have some other things that you want to tell us. And so let me look at our time here.
We have time.
We have quite a lot of time. We certainly have at least, I think, half an hour. So if you have anything else you want to tell us and discuss, please do go ahead.
Ok, eu vou começar me apresentando, agradecendo ao
Well, I'd first like to thank this commission. I'm a lawyer, and I'm part of the Themis organization that's been working with the National Federation of Domestic Workers and with CONLACTRAHO for more than a decade. And I would very much like to bring to fore 3 points. One of them is that Brazil, like the countries of our region, has had a situation of a slavery-like situation for centuries. Slavery from people who come from Africa, but with indigenous peoples as well. Although countries have gone through abolition, it was incomplete. It was not totally done. And keeping domestic work in the region the way it is now is an inheritance, it's a legacy, it's a continuation of this slavery-like situation, and it's not by chance. 90% of the domestic workers are women, in Brazil specifically black women. And for the society, it's living very naturally and normally with this exceptional situation, and that is a throwback to slave work and slave-type work. The case of Sonia and Magdalena and the other cases that have cropped up show that sectors of the society very easily live with this, precisely kidnapping little girls or saying that they're godmothers. And I think that the testimony of many people tells us that this continues to be the case. So that the first big issue that has led to this hearing is to make this more visible. And there, I should like to reply objectively to the rapporteur, highlighting the idea that for this group of organizations and for the unions, for the Confederation, the most important thing is that the Commission make visible all of these issues that have been brought here through an official report saying, look, here, this is what's happening in our continent, and it happens regularly. It represents a very grave violation of human rights of millions of people, and it's a breach of human rights. It's a violation of human rights that doesn't come up as something that's special or exceptional. It happens daily. It's going on a daily basis in all cities, as if it were reasonable to keep this state of play in place. So that our main request that my colleague raised is that these situations that have been spoken about, that they are part of a document written up by the Commission giving voice to all of these millions of workers who are out there. I think that it's also interesting. There was a question as to what the components would be for this. 6 main components were chosen for this hearing. We can go back over them to choose out of 13 or 14. Well, there are a lot of different components of the work, but these 6 points are points that we all consider as fundamental. They're crucial so that they have to be denounced, and so that they point to solutions for them. And thus, we would like to offer our recommendations to the states. So I think that one point which Commissioner Roberta mentioned has to do with the longevity of activism. And here I want to round off my reply. We have to think that many countries, the transition and the abolition took place in 1880 and 1834. In Brazil, it was in 1888. But in the 30s, a domestic worker called Laudalina de Campos Melo set up the first organization of domestic workers, and she was imprisoned by the dictatorship at the time, and she was in jail because she founded an organization. We pay tribute to her as much as we can, but in 1943, that was the first consolidation of the labor laws in Brazil, which totally excluded the category of domestic workers. There were no rights for domestic workers. And this legislation, this law, was revised a little bit in the 60s. And now, by 2013, was it possible with the work done, did we have any legislative laws for domestic work at all? So in 1443, when we had the first law, 2013, 60 years passed, so that domestic workers could have Social Security, a minimum wage, a registry to work, and so on.
So we really it's necessary to revise what is the legal framework in these countries and how this should still be improved. I think this is something that should be included in that list. And now I will pass the floor to my colleague, June. Thank you so much again for the opportunity.
Thank you for your response and for listening to us. And I noticed all my talking points are stolen, because to understand what's happening in our sector, because I'm a domestic worker, is also to understand that this work is deeply rooted in the legacy of slavery. And Madam President spoke about the fact that domestic workers have been organizing. We have been organizing. The Smith College of a whole timeline of women from the Americas in the early 1800s to hear the first revolt was the washerwoman strike in Georgia in the 1800s, where 3,000 washerwomen came together, building allyship with Irish washerwomen, etc., to win whatever wage increase. And I'm going to say I'm tired. I'm tired. I do not understand why in 2023 domestic work is still not valued. It is still not recognized as real work. Why? Why? Domestic workers, we contribute to every economy across this country, across the Americas, even across the world. Without us, think about it. We literally weave the society together. Without domestic workers, a surgeon would have to turn up with their children, lawyers in the boardroom with their babies. Who would take care of your elderly? I help the elderly to age in their homes, right? So they can live with dignity. And for me, it is work. It is real work. And so it's about time that the world listen. It's about time that, you all listen, you all join in solidarity and unity with a group of vulnerable women, right? And they say charity begins at home, right? We must begin international movement, and you have the power. I heard the talk about a report, and I would second that comprehensive report, because women we are suffering, and the pandemic. My God, we have always been told that our work is not valued. But yet, during the pandemic, it was domestic workers and farm workers, right? We were front and center, putting our life, putting our families' lives on the line to go to cook, clean people's house, look after their children, farm workers in the field, working to provide food on the table, and yet we are not recognized, yet our work is not valued. As we listen to the story from Honduras this evening, how because of no social protection, social security, how we suffered, right? A pandemic came, she lost her job. After she lost her job, 2 hurricanes, 2 strokes, her 11-year-old child to feed. Her young daughter had to take a work underage, right? And then what happened? She too became ill from COVID, getting it from her job, was sent home without pay. And I'm saying that I am tired, and I'm sure my colleagues here, we are tired. Domestic work is work. It is real work. It is work that makes the world turn. We are women. We are mothers, right? We are daughters. I'm 60 years old. I'm tired. I'm organizing across the globe. I'm tired. We are here because we are demanding for the higher authorities to hear us. And as I said, on this day, the 10th of I'm so emotional. It's the 10th of November. In a few days, I'll be 60. Before my eyes are closed, I would like to see real changes in this lifetime. And you call out names like Shirley Price, and I'm going to be calling out names like the great Dorothy Bolden, who organized domestic workers right here in the United States, Melina Cass, Geraldine Miller, all these greats, Myrtle, the great Myrtle, past president, Myrtle Voetbaai, who is gone, and yet we are still fighting. We would like to see real change and the recognition that not just the implementation of 189, but also that governments, because it's the governments and our employers who repeatedly fail us during the pandemic before. And I'm here, and I'm sure in unity with my sisters, we are saying enough is enough. We need you. We need your solidarity. And in solidarity. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ya, gracias. Sin duda, pues ya lo.
Thank you. And no doubt what my companions in struggle have described is what we experience every day, what we have demanded every day because of a long history, personal stories, because of the voices of millions of domestic workers who today are represented. It's not been easy to come to a place like this. It's not been easy for us to leave behind our families, to leave behind our domestic work, to come here and be the voice of our colleagues. When you congratulate us and you recognize our work, well, that is precisely what we want, but from the home where we do the care work, where we do household work, where we mop, we care, we cook, where we stand out for a quality, stand out for the quality of life of the families we serve and for our own families. I was prepared for questions, but when you shared this reflection with us that you don't need recommendations, but rather what can we do, we consider it's important that our states make better investments in order to guarantee Social Security. That is to say, a working woman who has Social Security that is guaranteed for her and her family has a dignified life, has a dignified job. We also want to say that the inclusion of household work in a system of care or domestic work has to guarantee all labor benefits like any other worker. In addition, something we wish to reiterate is precisely recognition of the impact that we do. It is no small thing, no minor thing to leave behind our families, our loved ones, our places of origin, to take care of other homes, to take care of other families, and to keep other families healthy and stable. We believe that domestic workers, thanks to the organization and thanks to the unity of the unions, both local and federations, and the federations are all the result of our struggles, our stories, our histories, and of giving a visibility to the most important thing, which is domestic work. In addition, I could close out my remarks by considering that Conventions 189 and 190 already have recommendations which should be included in these reports precisely so that these can be the tools that we can use from the local level to the global. In addition, we have been an important sector of struggle to set an example for other sectors, such as, for example, the workers in the platforms and agricultural worker companions. We reiterate this commitment, and we want to participate in all of the mechanisms and in all of the studies undertaken to make sure that they have the voice and legitimacy of our worldwide movement. Thank you very much. I'm from El Salvador, and the companions from the other countries have at least some social benefits or a dignified salary, but in El Salvador, Convention 189 has not been ratified. We are living in a slavery-like situation. Many of our colleagues are in the house, locked in, behind lock and key, 12-hour workdays, and most of those who suffer greatest vulnerabilities are those who work in the homes and stay in the homes. They work more than 12 hours. There's total discrimination, and often there are girls working in these houses. In El Salvador, we are demanding of the state that it other states can support us making sure that ILO 189 is ratified. Honduras and Guatemala have not ratified it either. So we're in the same situation. We don't have a salary. We don't have Social Security. There's no written contract. There is no set time for meals. We don't have an 8-hour work day like the rest of the working class. And so we want to draw more attention to this, that the government's, well, in El Salvador it is said that President Nayib Bukele is the coolest president of El Salvador, and that we have everything in El Salvador, but that's a lie. Those of us who have social organizations find ourselves in a situation such that if we speak out, we can be taken prisoner for doing so, for protesting. So we want the protection of the international organizations in our country so that we can speak out and demand that these rights be given to us as a matter of law because, well, the other colleagues were saying the work we do represents a major contribution to our country's economies. We are in charge of small children, older adults, persons with illnesses, and we do this because we need that salary in order to be able to survive so that our families can survive. We've migrated from rural areas to the capital city, and we live in those slave-like conditions. Oftentimes, they even take away our documents so that we can't go back. So we ask that you support us in everything possible, all of the institutions of the governments of the various countries, so that we can have these guarantees. The governments are responsible for giving us working persons these guarantees because we are all human persons before the law. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Yo también.
Thank you very much. I echo the words of gratitude and recognition for the time that this commission has devoted to the topic and the interest you've shown. Denise was explaining the three main lines, or the 6 main lines that studies could be developed along, and also recall the importance of a report by the Rapporteurship for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights in this regard, and specifically as regards access to Social Security. I'd like to recall that there is an agreement signed by the Inter-American Commission on Social Security and the OAS. We are available to cooperate. We have begun monitoring access to Social Security, and that's where we drew the figures from. It's very difficult to find statistics. Indeed, they don't exist, and that's also a result of this topic being rendered invisible. That's what has prevailed even in the international community. It's quite hard to find statistics on access to Social Security for groups that have been in vulnerable situations, and that includes women domestic workers. In this task of constructing the statistics, but especially giving visibility to them, and that the governments and Social Security institutions can compare how access to Social Security has been going among the groups of workers that are in vulnerable circumstances. That is very important. It's important to this visibility, and I make available to you the researchers we have at the Inter-American Conference on Social Security, both to be able to study the details and to give visibility to the situation of these working people. Thank you very much. Regarding the different work-related issues that were discussed, I think that gender-based violence should be at the core of this study based on what was already noted. The gender inequality is at the core of it. And it seems to me that the studies being undertaken, and in 2023, CONLACTRAHO and CARE will be involved in, can be important elements that would provide a foundation for this special report. But I reiterate, gender-based violence should be at the key, just as domestic violence has been rendered invisible. Gender-based violence with respect to paid domestic work, well, we're just barely revealing or aware of the levels at which this is happening.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. I think that you all are completed your presentations, and I want to thank you for that. And in closing, the commissioner and the special rapporteur have additional comments, and I want to start with.
Thank you. Gracias, Presidenta. Solamente
Thank you, Madam President. Just one specific point that slipped by earlier, but that I want to raise. In this whole context you've been discussing with us, there's a fundamental element, which is the sexual violence suffered by domestic workers in the homes, by their bosses' children. There are pregnancies that result from such sexual violence. And I think with this study, which we're going to undertake, I leave in December, but the Commission will be doing it, this is an extremely important dimension. Those myths of sexual initiation by the young men in the house with the women domestic workers, well, I think that's a very important dimension, and that complicity of silence of not allowing them to denounce this, well, I think this is one aspect of gender-based violence that we need to bear in mind. Thank you. Once again, thank you very much for putting this issue on the agenda. As the reference to the work of the Office of the Special Rapporteur for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights has been mentioned specifically in relation to this study. As Special Rapporteur, I also take on the commitment to work on this study, a study that obviously will address the matters that concern you, most of which coincide with the mandate of the Office of the Special Rapporteur: Social Security, working conditions, factors that have to do with the right to care, with recognition of your work as a work activity and important economic activity for our countries. There are several issues that you've raised that go beyond the mandate of the rapporteurship, and obviously will coordinate with the corresponding sectors and the corresponding rapporteurships of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, specifically regarding violence and sexual violence, which must be included in a report that takes on a comprehensive approach as you have proposed. So I'm most grateful as Special Rapporteur for this very specific request of the rapporteurship so as to be able to undertake a study on this very relevant and important issue. I thank all of you, and it's a pleasure to be able to contribute this work of giving greater visibility to and of demanding changes in the public policies of our states. Thank you.
Javier and Julissa and Maria Claudia, and of course all of you. I just wanted to say, you made a number of recommendations, and we look forward to receiving any documentation you want to send to us, because with documentation we can definitely know that we understand clearly what your requests are. But you did talk about the report, and we've agreed already that's something that we would do. And another one of your recommendations was that the issues of the rights of domestic workers should be raised in all, I suppose, appropriate reports. What I want to say about that is that we do have annual reports, as you know, and Chapter 4A is country by country, and there's nothing to stop you. In fact, we would welcome you all sending information from the countries where you are about the situation of domestic workers. It's only if we get the information from you that we can include it. So to say that this is an open invitation to send us information, what would be the period wrong? When should they send us that information for annual reports? What period of time? Does it matter? If you want to get into the following year.
The annual report?
Yes.
It's like in April?
Yes, so you have a lot of time between now and April. Send us a report for the next annual report, for the report for 2023. But so that's one opening that's always open to civil society actors to send us information.
No, but sorry. The report will be published in April.
No, I'm talking about the one for the next year.
The next year.
2024.
Yes.
Are we still receiving information for 2023?
Not anymore.
No,
No,
for
not
2022.
anymore.
No,
Exactly.
right, exactly,
For
yeah.
2023, yes, for 2024.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, so with we can receive information for the next report for.
Exactly.
It's a little complicated, but it will be 2024. For report for 2023.
Yes.
But the point is, please do send the information, and if you can send information with data, even better,
Exactly.
because we would always have to verify what you're sending. So that's another opening. So I just want to end by saying thank you for all of the information that you've provided. Thank you for the stories, some of them really harrowing to listen to, so we can imagine what living through that has been like. And I think in our report we have to also have a section on the extreme forms of exploitation that are also part of the landscape of domestic work. But anyways, thank you very much for your passion, and no, you have a lot of time to go still.
Sure.
All right? You just start. You haven't reached my age yet. So you've just begun. So don't worry about it. You have quite a long time to achieve your objectives.
Yes, you are so young.
Yeah, exactly. Says a 60-year-old.
She just became 60.
Just became 60. Yes. So thank you very much. And with that, we end the... Yes. We take a picture?
You want a picture?
Yes.